And start on time here. And we're going to get going. Bob, you know what I thought we would do while we're waiting for Master Smith and letting people get logged in is let anyone who is live currently or who is watching the replay share in and jump into one of our member meetings. And I thought I'd share the recording here if I can figure out how to do that. So let's take a look here. Bob, this is just a few months ago. So does that come across good, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep.
You might note during COVID, essentially.
But while we're getting started, I thought I'd
even
let people
even
kind
though
of
the
tune in
national
behind the
was
scenes here.
where a lot of people were not wanting to go mixed with the entire world, but then they would rent the theater. And a lot of them, like my son's birthday party last 3 years has been at Alamo Draft House. So
Volume is a little low, Mr. Owens.
however many he had, 4 kids or 15 kids, they all show up and they watch whatever movie they did. This ended up
Better?
This one was funny because a bunch of 13-year-old boys watching Weird Science. So it was an entertaining event.
I did just want to take a minute I was hoping I get a chance today to just thank you guys and express some gratitude for how far we've come. I was, this month we've already hit another record, and we're 3,800 more from our new goal of 55K, and if the compression comes through tonight, we'll be at 60K, and of course that's just one example of all the different ways we've grown. I was talking to my peak performance partner Monday that I've met with for years. He's and we do a Monday morning thing, and he said, "What changed for you recently?" And I said, "Well, talked about you guys," and I told him how that old analogy. I remember I heard this years ago about you have part of the combination and you're missing one number.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of been like that, and so I just wanted to make sure I shared that with y'all today. That I'm grateful.
Well, we always appreciate that, Stephen. That's great. Do me a favor. What are if you were to go through, and it's been about a year. If you were to go through what you think are the maybe the 10 biggest drivers of a dramatic increase, because if I remember correctly, a year ago you were doing about 17,000. Of course, that was down in the pandemic. But what has changed?
Well, first of all, yeah, those 2 months were the pandemic, but even before that, for like a decade, I was right around 30,000, which was kind of just that just getting by, and by the way, our pipeline this coming month is going to hit 30,000. So that's our tuition pipeline. So that's exciting victory. But to answer
your question, you mean your pre-committed billing,
monthly recurring tuition.
Okay, good.
Is so that's exciting. When we started with you, we kind of said that we said, well, how cool will it be when we can get our monthly recurring tuition to be what we make now,
Yeah.
And so that's happening. But I would say so the first thing, of course, was getting the guts to raise the prices and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the second thing is I'm going to use the ACDC model a little bit that I use for my guys here now. In the attraction, of course, a lot of the marketing stuff is so different, and quite frankly, it kind of ties to the discussion we always have about mindset, because I would never have believed that I should spend the money that I've been spending on marketing, but of course the ROI has been 100% there. So I learned that from you.
Right.
And then the in the conversions, the sales process, the character worksheets, and like just showing all the different ways that you've shown us to show more value has really helped with the conversion piece. And then, which of course, the next probably one of the biggest is the Black Belt Leadership Program, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fun and the irony of that is I had been teaching it kind of for years, right? Like I've always been like the guy that likes the leadership even more than the kicking and punching, but was not doing anything to make that into an actual marketable program that we can charge what we charge for. And by the way, everything you said about the pond has turned out to be 100% true.
About what?
About the pond, about when you're fishing in the right pond, you have different people. Like I was telling my team the other day, I said, we don't have any of those people that like there's like this summer is the first summer ever that I can remember where not a single person asked to freeze their account or anything like that. Like none of that happened, right? Like there's all those kinds of benefits, and then there were even little things that were just like personally from you guys. Like you looked at my layout, and I thought because I had that wall that I couldn't, and you said, hey, do this instead, and You know, so you know, and of course, as is always the case, a big piece of it is the mindset,
Sure.
right? Because it is also true that we would have had you spoken to us before we met you, and one of the leadership principles we teach, of course, is everything happens for a reason and serves us well. So
Sure.
I'm kind of like really grateful for that pandemic. But yeah, sorry, rest of the world, Barbara says.
Yeah.
But the you know, before I met you, and we were always around that I would have said, oh, if we ever got to $50,000 a month, that would just be it, you know, life changing and da da da. And of course now I'm like, okay, we're halfway to the goal, you know. So it's the thinking different.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, let me get you to chip in there. From your perspective, how hard is it to go from 50 to 100?
It's not that hard. We're like setting records. Like we're this month is going to be better than the 3 previous months. And
Good,
I think
good.
you said to me last month, okay, well, you know, we just hit 115, and then you said, okay, well, now your new benchmark is 125. You know, I say that to the staff. Everybody looks at me and they go, yeah. I think as of today, we're at 121.
Excellent.
So
Wait, well, that
thank you. Yeah, and it's I don't know. I think it's everything. It's just, you know, mindset. I think it's just taking the information like we all know and putting it into action. You know, that's the big thing, right? I think it's just a matter of the value. I think you know, letting everybody know the value of what they have within the 4 walls, meaning the families and the students and. But yeah, who would think?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, who would think during these crazy times that, you know, you can have I think those words would even come out of my mouth. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you'll be over 120 this month, probably 125.
yeah, I think so. It's gonna be pretty close.
Yeah, yeah.
It's gonna be pretty close.
Jan,
I mean,
when,
we're still getting it in. You know, we're still getting it in right now. But I mean, my guys still have people to close up.
yeah,
Which is so it's not like, okay, well, we're here, but I still have to finish my conversation with Mrs. Smith on this day, this week. I mean, this one's coming. So I mean, it's just a matter of tying up loose ends. But I mean, yeah, it's real. It's real.
so this will be the 4th record month this year.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations.
you. Well, again, I'll echo what Stephen just said. Yeah, I mean, it's I gotta show gratitude. Gotta humbly bow to everybody. Thank you. I mean, success leaves clues, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, the biggest thing, and Jan, I was going to pull you into the conversation. I remember, Jan, us having a conversation when you were at about 45,000, you know, without an expectation that there was much to go from there, right? And now you're in 115, 120,000 months, right? Now, I make sure I don't misstate that, but what have the last few months been like? You're muted.
Yes, we're averaging what our goal is, which is like 115 a month. So yeah, and you know, I was speaking to a man that was looking at joining. He actually joined your organization. I spoke with him a few times now, and he reminds me so much of myself because he can't envision the idea of ever charging $250 a month, and he can't envision the idea of 50,000 a month. And I remember when I used to I do this finger tapping that Tony Robbins does, and I remember 50,000 a month, 50,000, and I was like not believing it. And you told me you have to see it between your head before it's going to happen.
Right.
And now it's just opened up my eyes for so much more. And it's sad when you see the people that are like I used to be, with that tunnel vision that it'll never happen unless they believe it can happen. So just what Steve said, I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's to me, the huge transformation. It was an eye opener for me is, and Jan, you remember this, I used all day, 20 minutes or 30 minutes at a time. And shifting it to this format, and frankly, it was about the time that Zoom was released, because none of the other platforms ever worked for this. But shifting it to this format was a breakthrough, for everybody, because I was realizing for a number of years that as soon as I said to somebody that they could do it, what many were hearing is, well, maybe you could do it, I couldn't do it. It could be done in Denver. It can't be done in Boise, Idaho. It can't be done in, Brick, New Jersey, whatever it might be. Yeah, I mean, you're like Tony Robbins rolled up with Zig Ziglar. I could never have that person. I mean, whatever the excuses were, I know with my own schools, I used to do the turnaround, so I would jump in and whatever my worst case school was, I'd pull it up to number one, and then pump it up from there, and then turn it over to somebody else. And they would watch the numbers and say, well, that's you, I couldn't do that. And they'd have their list of excuses on why it was. That's when I started finding, that program director, he's going to turn it around, not me. Because I already knew they had that, mindset. Bass Smith will tell you years ago, I said, well, you keep having conversations where you're telling them about all the numbers that you're doing at your school, but they all believe that it's you. They believe that it's because you're the world champion and because you're this and you're that, you have this resume, that it's you. It can't be about the numbers you're doing, because they all hear, well, he can do it, good for him, but, and then the but is all kinds of crazy garbage that has nothing to do with anything. Paul, the same question for you. What?
Well, in Master Oliver, I was going to say Jan's school
From 50, 60 a month to 115 a month. And in your case, a lot of it is mindset of staff. But what are like the top 5 things?
I think one of them would probably be, if we put a label on it, I think it would be the achievement folder.
Why don't we stop there? Hey, welcome, Tim. I promoted you to moderator, so you're on camera, looking handsome and fit as always. So we'll put you to work a little bit here. And
I think we lost Paul.
oh yeah, I paused the video.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Now I'm catching up.
Now you're okay. Yeah, that was the recording. We thought we would start with a little behind the scenes. In fact, Tim, I think you were in that meeting a couple months ago, if I remember correctly. Tim, if you don't mind, we'll put you to work a little bit. I see a lot of other familiar faces on the line here. Ryan Burtney is online. Ryan, if you don't mind, I'll promote you to moderator. You can always choose to, or panelist is what Zoom calls it. I'm sorry, and I see Carol Middleton and a bunch of other people that I've known over the years here. But Tim, from your recollection of those conversations, I'm not sure at what point you tuned in there, but let's talk about your results here. You hit a record in 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And I believe you also hit a record in 2020, even though you were pissed off that it wasn't as high as you wanted it to be.
Yes, we did through the, that fine year of when the pandemic was at its height, I suppose. We did hit a record. It was about 6%. I think we ended up over 2019. And I believe everything that we put into effect and tightened up during that time obviously carried over into 21, which then we just exploded with, I think we were 64% over 20 in 21.
Wow. So
Yeah.
up 64% from 2001 to 2002.
21 to 20. Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. This is 22.
Yes.
that would be a real miracle, wouldn't it?
It would.
What year is it? Oh, goodness. The and what do you well, if you don't mind sharing, what did you end up 2021 at? What kind of revenue?
2021, we ended up at 1,040,000
Okay.
and some change.
And to be clear, that's for a single school.
Yes, sir.
And what's interesting is, I have been not too charitably, I freely admit, referring to the explosion of consultants and coaches and experts in the field as the bozo explosion for Greg, Bob, how many years now? A number of years, and it seems to only ever get worse, not better. And I got to tell you, in the pandemic, hopefully we're at the tail end of the damn thing. But it got worse, not better, right? I didn't see many voices that had any clue. Some of them who are close friends of mine. Their advice was, if you're about time to retire, get the hell out. I didn't think that was very productive. But if you would, Tim, what do you think are the 4 or 5 key drivers that have helped you hit those kinds of new records? In what, I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a comeback year this year, but you're not in the free state of Florida, right? I mean, you're in Illinois, and Illinois was worse than Colorado and better than L.A., but you still had a number of things to fight through with COVID restrictions and so forth, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, well, what do you think were the 4 or 5 key drivers last year that really skyrocketed things?
Well, I think the first thing would be never entering our mind that we couldn't get through this.
Yeah.
And, obviously the support from the group helped drive that, but we resolved to that ourselves and wanted to be a part of that. I think, as they say, thinking outside the box. You mentioned Zoom. We were fortunate where we had already had that set up from a few years back. We used it when people were on vacation. The first thing we did is click right over to it. I guess different incentives with working on keeping the student base involved and not allowing the excuse that, well, with everything that's going on, we're just going to have to take a break. Mm-hmm. And, just a variety of things from different contests online, all sorts of things to keep people interested and happy.
Yeah.
Tightening up a lot of the processes that we've been working on. But, when things are going well, you think things are going well. You don't realize perhaps how much better you could be doing by, again, tightening up some of the processes that you're working on, increasing your marketing. That's probably one of the biggest ones, increasing our marketing. Stepping back before all this, I think one of the biggest things that kicked off our success was realizing that we're professionals in what we do. And, we should be treated as professionals and to think differently than perhaps the way that, in 30 some odd years of training at the places I trained at, the way things were done there.
Yeah.
But obviously we tend to do what we know. And if things seem to be good enough, that's what we go with. And once we started changing some of those things, doing some things we never thought. And one of the things they talked about on the video, I think Jan was talking about somebody that could never envision charging $240, $250 a month, whatever that might be. Well, I got to say, 6 years ago, I was probably one of those people, and I stair-stepped things up. And I don't know where we were at the time, $139 a month, for a basic program. Well, when I say for a basic program, that's really all we had was a basic program. And, as we stair-step things up, we're now at $297 for a basic program.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we go up from there.
Yeah.
I've really got to say, I was concentrating on staff training, marketing, and realizing that we could do things that we didn't think we could do.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was talking about the bozo explosion before, I never finished the thought. Is where I was going with that was, I keep making the mistake of tuning in to Facebook Live or YouTube Live things, or paying attention to the groups and the pages of all these guys. And I've heard now, and Greg, Bob, you've probably heard this a number of times too. I keep hearing now Oliver says they have $1 million a year schools, but that's bullshit. Or, nobody can do that, or that's just ridiculous. I keep hearing some version of that comment happening from these guys. And Tim, as you well know, and you're one of them, we have about $12 million a year single schools now. And of course, a number that are, 2 locations, 3 locations, 4 locations. And, I did that back in, early 80s. Was running a multi-million-dollar. Now that was a chain of schools, but inflation adjusted had several schools. My school in Lakewood, Colorado, was a $1 million a year school, inflation adjusted, in the 80s. And so it's not only doable, but it's pretty templated and pretty straightforward. Now, Tim, you've been through the throes of staff transitions, of good staff, apathetic staff, great staff who are enthusiastic but young, getting them trained one thing or another. All of the different pieces that go with that, right? But if you look at the key drivers, to recap what you said, is you have what's the new student tuition, what's the tuition for the renewal, having what some people call an upgrade. I don't really like to think in that terms, but having a higher level program that pushes their tuition up. What we always start with is getting the new tuition right, getting the sales conversion rights, and correct, getting tight ratios. And I know you worked a lot on that, and then just what we come to call drinking from a fire hose. And you know as well as I do what our biggest problem with new people is we get them too much traffic and they almost drown in intro traffic. And strangely, probably you mastered that, I would guess, when you're still at 40,000 a month on how to generate enough traffic. Now that changed dramatically, to be fair, in 2020, because as schools shut down, events shut down, and so forth, we had to make a pretty dramatic shift. But luckily, we were all positioned for that with Google and pay-per-click and Facebook marketing, et cetera. But it seems like that's the key drivers, is fix your new student tuition pricing, fix your conversion ratios. In other words, raise the prices, tighten the conversion ratios, feed the pipeline with as much traffic as you can get. And then number 2, it's fix your dropout rate. Because as you know, we see fairly big schools even that are still running 7-8% dropout rate. And in fact, most of the quote unquote teaching and curriculum gurus have horrible attrition. And what happens is they just don't focus on the right things. They focus on, I see Master Smith sort of kind of got in and then lost it. Oh, he's back. Okay. But that student retention rate is extremely important. Getting that down to 1 or 2% loss a month, in other words, a 98, 99% retention month over month, is essential. Getting that renewal process in place, and then ultimately, the difference between a $50,000 a month and $1 million a month single school, between a $100,000 2 schools and $300,000 a month for 2 or 3 schools as staff, right? And the difference in, you've gotten better at personal life, better at workout, better at some vacations, and the only way you do that is having quality staff where things keep going while you're not there. Is that a fair thing to say, Tim?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And we had the video of Paul a minute ago. I teased Paul about spending half his life in the Virgin Islands. And Jan, we've always teased Jan about taking off every summer and, on vacation. In fact, right now I think she's, I don't even know where it was, something Key. Longboat Key, is that it?
Cedar Key.
Cedar Key.
Yes.
Wherever the hell that is, I guess it's in Florida. But really, that should be what it is, right? Your business should be built to support you and your lifestyle, and also to support your community and your students. It shouldn't be you kill yourself, run yourself on the ground, work 100 hours a week, doing stuff that a lot of it you don't enjoy doing. The stuff you should be doing is the stuff that you're particularly good at, that you enjoy doing, that are the key drivers of the school. But then you should be able to build it up and staff it and keep those guys spinning like a top. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And welcome, Master Smith. I see you mastered the technology.
I've been on since the beginning. It just, nobody made me a panelist.
Because your name said B test.
Yeah, and I don't know how that came up, so,
I do know how that came up.
no, and I don't, and I couldn't see my picture up there, so I didn't even know my name was that until Bob told me.
Well, that's right, because you weren't a panelist, because you were under B test when we had to
I was a
promote you.
B test.
Yeah. Not that anybody else cares, but I could explain how that happened to you.
I was trying to work up to an A test, and then maybe I could be a panelist after that.
No, what happened is you logged in to Bob's login rather than to your own, and Bob had opted in as B test because that way he could distinguish it from a real person attending. So that's the simple explanation, if you will. But Matt Smith, we started with as you know a little bit of behind the scenes. I thought, and the recording, I guess, Greg, was good enough that you thought we were live. But
I did too. I heard the whole thing myself.
Yeah, that was a recording behind the scenes from a couple months ago. But we had Stephen D. Castillo, who is in the free state of Florida. We had Jan Lappin, who is in the free state of Florida. And we had Paul Pendergast, who's in the the least free state in the country in the last 2 years in New Jersey, Brick, New Jersey. So talking about their new all-time records over the last year and 2 years. But Matt Smith, what would you add to what Tim was saying and what they were saying? What are some key drivers? I see on our meeting today we have some very long-time martial artists here. Welcome, Jesse Thornton. I'll promote you guys to panelists and let you come on video if you want. But I guess they can raise their hand or something like that if they want.
Yeah, there's a little button at the bottom that you can click, raise your hand, and
There
Bob
you go.
let me in.
But I see Carol Middleton. I let you in. I see Jesse Thornton. I see Stephen White, Lee Montgomery, Lance Soares. A lot of old familiar faces, and then Brooke Adderhold and James Kressler. Pardon me if I butcher any names here, but what would you add to that? The key drivers, if you were and so we're all over the board. If you were a $50,000 a month school, or let's say you had two schools that were each doing 50, and you wanted to get them each to 100, or you had a single school that was $1 million. That our mission this year is to get a bunch of $2 million single schools. So the Bozo Explosion can have a complete stress meltdown, and tell everybody that we're lying about that as well, because that, if nothing else, that entertains me when they do that.
Yeah, I've got the question and I've got the answer.
Go ahead.
Because there was so many schools that I watched progress through that last year, Tim being one of them. And you could say, what was the difference between Tim in 2020 and 2021? And I will tell you, Tim had a whole new staff, a young group that were learning, but had been with him for a long time, that he moved into another level and started training them another level. But they started really understanding their numbers. They started looking at their stats, and then they were able to adjust each month because they had goals set. They knew what they were shooting for. And when they didn't make it, they would go back and look at their numbers and to see where the holes in the bucket were, and then plug those holes. And a lot of times it was just getting more leads because they had good numbers, good percentages going from lead to appointment, or appointment to intro, or even intro to enrollment. It was just that then maybe they weren't getting enough leads. Well, a lot of people say, my problem, if I just had enough leads, I could be successful. But that's not the case. You not only have to have the leads, you have to make sure that you're doing enough marketing to get those leads, and start putting that marketing to a marketing plan. And Tim started filling up what we called his marketing calendar. And he started having preset events and filling up this month and next month. And then after you have a few successful months of the marketing you've been doing, then it's much easier to add to that and keep doing the ones that you were doing, but keep adding more. Well, because he had his numbers, when his leads increased, all of a sudden, last year, 21, he averaged, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or incorrect on this or misstated it. I believe last year you averaged 24 students a month enrollments. And to get 24 enrollments, was that about right?
That is about right, sir. And as I was just thinking, I always remember Master Oliver saying there's nothing that 100 new students can't fix. And that was one of the key differences for us from 20 to 21. As I looked, put on about 100 new students, and that's what took us over the $1 million mark.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think that was important for Tim and the other schools, I started beating in everybody's head. What's the 300 mean, Tim? What's the magic 300?
You 300 students at about an average of a $300 value.
Oh,
And-
well, and by the way, Tim, that's a good question for me to ask you, if you don't mind. At a million 40 last year at one school, how many active students did that end up being? Let's say by the end of the year,
314.
314. So you were doing. God, what's that quickly in my head?
About 290 was his student value. He was right at the high end because there for a while, his active count was just under 300, but then he had a higher student value. So he hit that million mark in the middle of the year, the first time that he did it. And it might even have been April or May, I think, when he hit his first $1 million, what I call $1 million month, which is 84,000. And we
Yeah,
did
being on
and
track
we're
for
sitting
$1
there calculating that out because he didn't have the 300 students yet, but he still hit the $1 million mark. And I said, well, when I say 300, you either have to be over on one if you're under on the other, or you make them both the same. So you had that magic combination of those two numbers. Now, of course, it sounds easy when you say, oh, all you got to do is 300 at 300. Well, there was a lot that went into that because how were we going to get that student value up? Well, you had your basic students paying about 250 then, and then you were having your leadership paying high 300s. So all we had to do was renew at least 50% of the students. And if we had a 350 on the high side and we had a 250 on the low side, and we have some of our members are doing obviously much more than that, charging even more than that, that would give you that 300 average. And so it wasn't even an astronomical price increase. And some schools, and you were saying it before, Master Oliver, everybody likes to come up with their own excuse. Oh, no, we can't charge that in our area. You don't understand. Nobody makes that kind of income. This is a small, either a small community or a low income area. But you remember the one that we always chuckle about was when one of our friends in California, I don't want to mention name, but
Ernie Reyes Sr. and Tony Thompson.
They were in that San Francisco,
Silicon Valley.
and
Why don't I tell the story? Because you're butchering, retelling my story.
no, I don't
So,
like
I could-
these names.
Yeah, well, that's okay. They find it entertaining when we use their names. So, but the story was I was sitting there at one of their staff meetings, and this is probably 20 years ago, truth be told, and I had come in and done a training for their staff. Well, not staff. I mean their owners and staff. They did it in Squaw Valley, and then we had done basically a similar thing there in somewhere around San Jose, a little breakfast place. And I'm sitting there looking at their stats, and they were doing the same thing we do, is everybody puts their stats up, one thing or another. And I'm looking at their stats, and finally I said, Ernie, how is it that in Silicon Valley, the highest per capita income place in the United States, bar none, a higher per capita income than the financial district of Manhattan, how is it that you're charging half of what I'm charging in Denver, Colorado? And his answer to me, which I found hysterical, and I told him that at the time was, well, the cost of living is so high here in Silicon Valley, that's all they can afford for martial arts lessons. And I said, well, I suffer from a, bachelor's in economics from a pretty good school, Georgetown University, and an MBA. And I can tell you the way economics works, it's supply and demand. And the reason why housing, which is the primary cost of living differential in Silicon Valley, is so high is it's too much money chasing too much product. So mostly housing is expensive because people are making a ton of money. And by the way, pretty much nothing else is more expensive other than, state of California taxes the hell out of gas. So they're paying an extra $2 a gallon or something like that for gas. But other than that, your cable bill's the same, groceries are the same, the price of the MSRP on the car, and whether you're in, Nantucket, Ann Arbor, or in Silicon Valley is the same. The real difference was in the cost of real estate. But that's the story you're alluding to, Master Smith. So
and that value, when we say your student value is 300, or some of our schools have higher student value. When some schools say, well, I couldn't charge 300. Well, again, even if your higher program is above 300 and your basic program is below 300, you're going to add the value to the program, because the value comes in the success of your students getting to black belt and the benefits they receive. And all you've got to do, and I will give you credit on this, Master Oliver, you are the master of testimonials. You, at the black belt test that you had out in Colorado, when we had a couple hundred people testing, you would have your cameraman set up by the sofa area there, by the ballroom, going in and interviewing these parents, talking about with their child, talking about how they changed from white belt to black belt, and have parents crying. They were so emotional with the excitement of their kid getting their black belt. And
by the way, anybody on here is welcome to see that video. It's at milehighblackbelt.com.
Yeah, it's a great eye-opening thing, and but that's why we start with a little lower, under 300, and you don't like it much under 300. You want them to be 300 even on basic, or 347.
Well, we'll talk. Let me talk about that, Master Smith. Is as we look at the drivers there of Jan's results, of Stephen, of Paul, of Tim, and many others, is one of them is tuition. And I would say, kind of in reverse order, is the primary drivers are student retention, so having a low dropout rate, right? Then it's having a high lifetime value per student. And we can think in terms of that, of having a high average. That's the number you've been using, Master Smith, is high average monthly revenue per student, or lifetime value. So you start with retention and high lifetime value. One of the ways you get to high lifetime value and strong retention is having a strong renewal process. And it's one of those dummy down bozo explosion stupidities of the industry, where people have either gotten rid of that, or what they've done is they've done what I call a why bother. My basic program's 150, my black belt's 175, and my leadership is 200. Well, to me, that's a why bother. Why bother having different levels? Just, change it. But so you get retention as the first priority, high lifetime value as a second priority. And that could be thought of as the average monthly value, but that's got to interact with longevity, because hell, I could make $600 a month and keep people for an average of 2 months. I'm still going to be on a hamster wheel, right? My friend Tim Cover used to call that feeding the beast, having such a high dropout rate that you've got so much pressure to flow new people into the school that it's just kind of never ending. But then once you get good retention, high lifetime value, now you got to have enough people coming in the door to hit your target number. And Master Smith, what you were alluding to is our target for a single school to be at $1 million is basically just 300 and 300, right? Is 300 active at a minimum average revenue of $300 a piece. And that includes family programs, that includes people who are paid in full, that includes all of that stuff. But 300 and 300 is a $90,000 a month school. That puts you over $1 million. You know, a pretty good tick over $1 million for the year. Tim, your numbers are right in that range, right? And then our mission really for our top schools is a bunch of $2 million a year single schools with well over $1 million net, right? Because that's the other problem I see. And Master Moody, we were talking about this just recently. You know, I always see in the industry, you know, these people who have these mega schools that get touted, and you know, some of them are really good friends of mine, and they're really nice people. But I just don't want a 20,000 square foot warehouse with 1,000 people running around doing 10 different programs at a low revenue per piece. And what happens in those schools is the net is shockingly low, right? The amount of effort to keep it running is incredibly high, especially when you start ending up with multiple programs. You end up with a cardio kickboxing program, a BJJ program, a taekwondo program. You know, up in your neck of the woods, Tim, my dear friend Fred Degerberg. You know, that was what he was famous for years. And I tell a funny story about him and I in a Thai restaurant when I was up there coaching his staff and doing a little seminar. Is we were actually at a little Thai restaurant where Fred, being Fred, kind of ordered one of everything on the menu, and we were sitting there going, okay, you got Savat, you got Thai kickboxing, you got Taekwondo, Goju, Kempo. Let's make it one thing. What are we going to call it? We ended up calling it the Degerberg Blend. Okay, so what's the first thing you're going to do? We do a front punch. Do you want to call it a jab or do you want to call it a front punch? How about how about a cross? What do you want to call that? And we ended up putting together the Degerberg Blend because the whole process of having all that stuff going on sucked the life out of the operations and sucked the life out of the net profit, right? So we see a lot of that where people have, what looks like a big deal on the surface. My friend Greg Silva, I remember I wrote that book, Jeff, you remember, in 1999, Everything I Wish I Knew When I Was 22. And I remember I mailed it to Greg, and Greg called me, and I forget what chapter it is, but there's a chapter written about him. And the chapter is called Bigger Isn't Always Better. And he was in that boat where, the top line numbers were big and the net profit was horrible, and he was working 364 days a year. His number one day for renewals was Thanksgiving Day. And literally he was working, Greg's a hard worker. He was working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. And the top line number was 1,000 students, but the reality is the net profit wasn't very good. And I remember when after I mailed him the book, he called me and said, "I wish somebody had explained that to me earlier." And of course, me being me, I said, "Well, Greg, I sat in your office 3 or 4 different times and told you exactly that. You just didn't want to listen to me." Like the time I sat in his office and told him to kill his pro shop because he go, "I have the number one pro shop in the country." I said, "Yeah, but you're losing money on it. Why are you bothering?" Well, you need to kill that thing. But that's the type of thing that, Tim, in the last 2 years, has your level of brain damage in running the school, has it gotten easier or has it gotten harder?
Well, it's gotten much easier. Much easier.
And how would you compare with the level of intensity maybe back when you were at 27,000 a month versus at 100,000 a month? How's your health? How's your focus? How's your ability to have a life outside the school?
Well, it's existent for one. Back 27,000, I was doing most everything myself. Mm-hmm. And, with a little, some assistance. And yeah, as we talked a little bit about earlier, key has been the development of the staff and getting it so the day-to-day operations they can run. I can look after marketing. I can look after their individual development and let them run with things.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm able to, I've got a 3.5-week motorcycle ride coming up down Route 66 coming up in May. Fun. That never would have been thought of. So,
well, one of these days I'm going to convert you from the Colt of Harley to the Colt of BMW, but we'll still work on that.
Nice.
Well, the key thing is too, when you're gone, it's not you're gone and you made enough money so that you can suffer through the loss. It's you're gone and they make money when you're gone. So you can be
Oh, absolutely.
happy and have a good time when you're gone. 'Cause
Yeah,
there's
very
no
good point.
sense in going on vacation and then you realize that, well, I'm going on vacation so that I can go work harder when I get back.
That was Jan's story all the time. Every time she left to go on vacation, the school gross would even go up. So she was going, well, I'm going to get out of you guys' way because every time I leave, y'all do better than when I'm here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, and that's the way it should be. I mean, ultimately, the thing about getting to $1 million a year school with high net, right? That's the important part, and high, you know, not to be unfair, high student value, high student quality, a massive impact on the community, and a high net is essential. But the thing about that is it should be a well-oiled machine. And you, Tim, you said staff, but maybe to identify that a little bit better is it's having systems that are well trained and indoctrinated. It's having compensation systems where people see what's in it for them, and not that people just work for the money, but it's having compensation systems that work. It's having people who are really socialized and indoctrinated, if you want to use that word, but really buy into the outcome that you're looking for the students. And I'm not talking about, you know, trained killer mercenary types, but people who are really sincerely interested in the best outcome for the student and know that getting the best outcome for the student is also going to be beneficial for them, not only psychologically, but financially, right? Is that fair? And so now you have a feeder system for staff, you have a staff training program, you have people who kind of see what's in it for them from a standpoint of doing the best thing for the students. And you can be out on a motorcycle trip. And Matt Smith, we went to our little trip that was our LA to Seattle trip that got waylaid in Sonoma. But Tim, have you ever heard that story?
I have, yes. Yeah, getting stuck in wine country.
Oh, did you get my Neil Peart books?
No, sir.
I'll have to make sure I had the right address on that. I sent you Neil Peart, drummer of Rush. You know,
Yes.
For anybody who doesn't know, you know, he wrote a number of really good books, but mostly they were travel books about him motorcycling from concert to concert.
Ah,
Right? And so what he started with when he was younger is he would get out the bicycle and he would bike from town to town. And then as he got a little bit older, it was motorcycle. And so literally he's covered every inch of the United States and Western Europe. But I sent you several books. One of them is, which probably I didn't send you, is a tearjerker. It's called, it'll come to me in a second. But it's one that he wrote. His daughter died in getting hit by a drunk driver, and then his wife died slowly and, you know, painfully of cancer. And it was a book where basically he called the man and said, "I'm done," got on his motorcycle and went on basically a year, you know, motorcycle trip to put his head together. But he wrote a book about that one as well. But I'll have to track down, make sure I sent it to the right address. But I sent you 3 of his books that I really enjoy.
Okay.
And Master Oliver, you said some important things about Tim's growth that everybody should really listen to. You know, when he said he added that 100 students, well, it's not you just say, I want to add 100 students. What he started doing, once he started understanding his numbers better, then he started every month, they were doing what was their net enrollment. See, not just look at how many enrollments you get, not just look at how many dropouts you have, but actually what is the net enrollment each month? Well, if I'm getting 10 net enrollments each month, well, I know that in a year I'm going to be at 120 more students than I had last year. Well, if I grow 120 and I'm at 200 last year and I grow 120, I'm going to be at 300 plus at the end of the year. So the idea, now we always like to get them to get the 100 even faster than a year. You know, we put new members on a quick start program to get them 100 students in the first 90 to 120 days. And if they implement all the marketing that they hadn't been doing before, it gives us a chance to get enough flood of traffic in before they can all drop out, because most of them haven't fixed their dropout systems when they first start yet. But Tim has fixed that dropout system. At the same time, he increased his enrollments and started getting better on both ends. His enrollments were going up, his retention was better. And so that's why he grew over that 300 last year so quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I'm going to just kind of promote everybody who looks like they might be on video as panelists. And we've been kind of going for 50 minutes here. One of the things while I am doing that is, and any and everybody, if you want to accept and become a panelist, you're welcome to ask any and all questions with this webinar format. That's kind of our only best way, not our only way, but our best way to do that. But you know what I will say is, and Master Moody, you would chip in on this one. I see a lot of schools that start doing fairly well, right? And Tim, this certainly could have been you, but I can name 10 or 15 schools that I've worked with that we got them from 20,000 to 40,000, or from 30,000 to 60,000, and suddenly they think they've arrived, right? Mass Smith, you remember we were working with a school that went, they went from 7,000 to 20 and thought that their shit didn't stink anymore. And I find it interesting because, what I have always done over the years, and Master Smith, I know you have done this, and Master Moody has done this, is I've always been involved with, if you want to call it a mastermind group, with a peer group of people who are doing better than I'm doing, and worked with mentors that are able to guide and direct. And sometimes in some areas I knew more than they did, but they were able to look over my shoulder and see where my blind spots were, because you need that somebody looking over your shoulder, the blind spots. Matt Smith, as you well know, early in martial arts, you were the mentor and involved with high level mastermind with Junery Institute, but with the top people in the world. I mean, Bill Clark freely acknowledges much of what he implemented in ATA came from you, and interacting with the Chuck Norris schools and all the Texas guys, everything else. But what I think is important, and as recently I had been very engaged and involved with at a high level, at a very intimate level with I mean that professionally, of course, but with Dan Kennedy and his upper echelon, and of course he had some health problems recently, and a lot of that disappeared overnight. But if you don't always have a peer group of people who are doing as well, if not better than you are, and two is somebody looking over your shoulder or mentoring you. And Master Smith, I remember when you were world kickboxing champion, you had a number of coaches, boxing and kickboxing that you trained with. Most of them you could have beat them up at any point, because they weren't exactly 27 years old and at the peak of their fighting capability. But they were looking over your shoulder, finding weaknesses, finding strengths, helping you realize what the areas that you should be paying attention to. And then I know well, because I
don't want to cut you off, but that whole formula that you're talking about is the nucleus of our training. Yeah. Because all we did was take that same principle of how we made great black belts, and we made great black belts by them coming to class and training on a weekly basis, by having an instructor or a mentor to supervise and, like you said, look over their shoulder. They also learn from their other peers. When we're on our weekly meeting with all our members, and we do it just like the schools. We have a beginner group, an intermediate group, and an advanced group. And when you have that group of peers that are around you, you learn from the guys that are better than you, but you also learn from the guys that aren't as good as you, because you don't want to do what they're doing. Yeah. So
and they oftentimes they ask good questions, even though they haven't arrived yet. I mean, I go back to hanging around with you in 1976, and I was always amazed that if you looked at the top 20 kickboxers in the country, they were all cycling through, the school that you were working with, the gym you were training in, because all the top people were training together, right? I was always amazed at a few of them that you were getting ready to fight that were, training partners not too long earlier. And of course, I was, I always said I was the best non-professional fighter on staff. But I figured out pretty quickly that I might have been number 4 or 5 in the country with a lot of broken feet and broken hands, but I was never going to be you, Bill, Joe, John Eves, or Don Wilson.
Well, you were looking at the monetary and you were saying, wait a minute, you guys are training like 30 hours a week. And now you're getting paid how much? $500 for a 5 round, $100 a round or something, and you're making less than minimum wage. What the hell are you doing?
You guys looked at me like I was a Martian, and I was serious about it. I watched you training 35 hours a week, more or less, and you had a 6 to 8 week training cycle before a big fight. So 35 hours a week, that's 140 hours a month. That's probably a 300-hour training cycle before a fight. And so I'm looking at it going, well, let's say
what's the ROI?
Yeah, let's say I become the U.S. champion, and which was doable probably. So so now I've got what do we come up with, a 300-hour training cycle.
Under minimum wage, I still remember.
How much does that make? Okay, so how's this professional? If you're making 50 cents an hour, or $1 an hour, how's that being a professional fighter? That was, and I swear to God, I was having that conversation with you, and you were the world champion. Bat was the U.S. champion. Mike, I think, was, I think he was the U.S. welterweight champion. And I forget who else was there. Probably Jerry Rome and maybe Wallace or Lewis. And all
those guys, Larry Carnahan.
And I swear you guys were looking at me like I'm a Martian. Nobody ever thought to get a calculator out before.
Well, we justified it. We said, we're not in it for the money. And you know what that sounds like? It sounds like these school owners out there who can't make any money, who say, I'm not in it for the money. Because I love it.
I remember what you said to me. You said, well, you would be training anyway. And my answer was, yes, not 35 hours a week.
Yeah, but Master Smith isn't wrong, that it does sound like the school owners that want to justify spending the wrong amount of time in the wrong place and not focusing on the things that they say they care about, which really is, I think one thing I'd want to add, and you guys have been covering all the topics, but there's a disconnect, I think, a lot of times with thinking that there's a difference between doing your business well and being a really good instructor.
Yeah.
And there isn't one, at least in my view. If you're going to be a really good instructor and you care about your students and you care about doing a professional job, you're going to make your school very, very successful. Tim is, and I'm going to say this, and then Tim can tell me if this is right or not. Tim's students are better cared for and taken care of and taught better now that he's $1 million school than when he was a $300,000 school. Tim, is that a fair statement?
Yes, I would say so. There's so much more that they're getting and learning.
Yeah, when you start making more money, you pay attention to all the things that we help you pay attention to, then you're a more professional operation, and therefore your students are better taken care of. So there's not a disconnect. There's no difference between business and the martial arts. There's really no difference to do it properly and do a good job. And I think that's where people get caught up. And Master Oliver, when you mentioned people are maybe being derogatory about, oh, well, Master Oliver doesn't have $1 million schools or blah, blah, blah. Or probably in the background, there's some stuff going, well, they're selling out or they're this or that.
That's what the broke guys say.
Yeah.
I don't want to say
they're saying that because they're afraid of doing things properly. So for those, listening, if you're afraid of doing things the better way, it may not be the best thing for you if you want to stay. So like in the example you guys use, the guys that just wanted to be fighters and they didn't want to work, they're probably not being successful in the rest of their life either. But you had a bunch of other people that were fighting, but also being very successful. That's really what we're trying to do. is those two things do go together, and they do go together very well.
And maybe said a different way, Master Moody.
Or can
And
I add one thing to that, Mr. Oliver, because I'm going to hop over on that other meeting.
our other meeting that we're
Yeah, I'll
overlapping.
jump over there. You know, if everybody would run their martial arts school and think of it like, I want to become a black belt in business. Because if you look at their martial arts training, you know, how to kick and punch and be a good black belt is way up here, and their business training is way down here. But then they don't understand why their school business doesn't get better when they spend all their time just making themselves, they think because I'm a better martial artist, it makes me a better school. It doesn't. You can be a good martial artist. I've seen so many great fighters and champions who didn't know how to run a school because they never learned how to be a black belt in business. And to be a black belt in business, you got to do it the same way. You got to train on a weekly basis. You have to have an instructor that's going to show you your strengths and weaknesses and help you correct what you're doing wrong. You have to learn from your peers. And coming to that weekly training, just like you have to be a good black belt. And if you don't have an instructor and you try to do it on a video or you try to do it out of a book, you never become a good black belt that way. No different than in a business. You've got to learn it. And that's, I think, our winning formula that really strikes home.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump over on that other meeting, Master Oliver.
Yeah. I'll be there in a second. We'll wrap up here pretty quickly. What the only thing I might do is summarize that, which is being a great instructor is foundational, but it's not adequate to running a quality school. Is that a fair thing to say, Tim? If you're a horrible instructor and if you're only in it for the money, you're going to have a high dropout rate, you're going to have low quality people, you're going to have a low lifetime value, to put it into a financial perspective. However, you can also be a great technician and have the same problems because you don't have good people skills. And the staff training we're talking about it's not about you being the greatest master instructor, and you are, but it's about your staff being able to replicate those activities and your staff being able to make human contact with people and your staff not letting anybody fall through the cracks. Is that a fair way to say it, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. And if I can just say,
Yeah.
yes, I'd like to think that I've been a good instructor.
Yeah.
And the difference was, before getting the training, as Grandmaster Smith was just talking about, sure, do $25,000, $30,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty proud of that because I was figuring it out on my own. And that was okay. But yes, like with anything else, getting the right training, help with the systems, the mentoring, the encouragement, pushing a little bit. Everybody needs a little lifting every now and then,
Sure.
Getting through the hard times. And that's what's been the difference for me, for us at the school, between, $30,000 a month and $100,000 a month.
Yeah. And I might say we've kicked your butt a few times too to get you to move a little faster, if that's a fair statement.
Yes.
You and Jan used to be my two whipping people of, oh my God, we don't need to wait 18 months to implement this stuff. Why don't we do it quickly? And then Colby became on pricing, right, Greg? Remember that? Hey, anybody has any questions? We're happy to answer any questions. Bob, your phone number is what? 720-256-0208.
Correct.
So I would highly recommend anybody who'd like to, and you may already have time set up with most of the people on the meeting here, but anybody who has any questions at all, we'll schedule a time with Master Smith and myself and with Bob and Master Moody to answer any and all questions you have in specific situations. What I will say to everybody is, number one, the dumbest thing to do is ever think you've arrived. You've always got to be in student mode. You can never think that you've arrived, because what happens then is you end up with, and I call it this: you grow. You think you've arrived. You end up on a plateau, but I think, as we all know as martial artists, there's really no such thing as a plateau. A plateau is just a gradual downward shift, right? And you've got to keep your brain fresh. You've got to stay engaged with other people. You've got to be engaged in a peer group that's kicking your butt, and you've got to have some mentors who are kicking your butt. The second thing I tell people when you're looking at this is always make sure that the training cycle is in the right order. Right? Is what I see a lot of times is somebody will go from, they're working with us, for instance, and then all of a sudden they're doing Tony Robbins stuff, and they're doing Grant Cardone, or what it used to be Tom Hopkins, Zig Ziglar, now Brandon Bouchard or whatnot. And the right process, which is the way I did it, was you start with very general information. You start with basic ideas of alternative choice and how to close a sale and handling objections. And you start with basics of direct response marketing. Then you've got to pull it all together with somebody who not only has mastered all that stuff, but has put it directly into your business and is feeding you very specific information as opposed to general information. And I think too many people try to go the opposite way. They feel like they've arrived, and then what they're doing is they're, going to Tony seminars, and of course we've done all that stuff. I mean, Tony's a black belt with my instructor, with June Rhee. Heck, Tim, you probably know the story, but at one time Ernie Jr. was dating Tony's stepdaughter, and June Rhee was teaching Tony martial arts, and we were very engaged and involved with it. He was even involved with the I think the first World Conference that when I took over NAPNA. He was in Germany, but he did a live video for to recognize Lifetime Achievement Award and recognize June Rhee at the same time. But that type of material, whether it be Dan Kennedy, Jay Abraham, Tony Robbins, Zig Ziglar, Grant Cardone, whoever it is, that's the high level general stuff, and then you need to work it down to the specific implementation and action, see how other people are doing in the field. I remember when I first started working with Gary Halbert and Jay Abraham years ago. Well, it was all great theoretical, but you didn't know what to do next, right? And then it was literally, we spent thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars experimenting before we figured out what was really working in the field. And Tim, as you know, we have a whole bunch of people who are doing things in the field right now that are working just great. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to say, oh, well, that's working. Let's try that. And generally, if we don't have somebody who's making something work, it's been tried and it didn't work. It's been tried again and it didn't work. It's been tried again and tweaked and it didn't work. But leave it on that. Tim, what would you add to that before we call it a day?
Well, again, systems. And you mentioned probably how I had to be prodded along a little bit. I have realized, because, that hindsight is great. The faster that I implemented the systems, the more success that I had.
Yeah.
And I took my time. It was, my personal feelings, and I had good, slow, steady growth. If I had to do it over again, I guess I would have done things much more quickly and been beyond where I am now.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps, I mean, there certainly is a learning curve. Bob, you remember this. Toby Milroy, when we started working with Toby years ago, and Toby freely admits that, he's a great guy, but he was running about a $17,000 a month school. And I was working with him for probably 7 months. And Toby freely admits he was listening to everything, learning. He's a smart guy. He's an analytic guy. Hadn't done a damn thing, right? Then on month 8, he implemented, and his gross jumped from about 17 to the mid 40s, essentially overnight, in the next month. And sometimes that's what it takes. I mean, obviously he's a very smart and focused guy. What we prefer is we're going to give short implementable steps where people are going to implement right away. And of course, at the higher level, the group you're in, Tim, is the $1 million plus schools, with my mission to turn the gross into the net and get the gross in the $2 million range. By the way, with a better lifestyle and a much higher, as you well know, we're really working now on building net worth as opposed to just building a big business. And it's a big difference, isn't it? It's a big difference of being able to know that you're financially independent and you're running your martial arts business because you love it, not because you have to do it to pay the mortgage this month.
Right.
Bob Dunn, anything to add before we call it a day?
No, sir. I'm looking forward to chatting with, some of the people that I haven't spoke with yet. The phone number again is 720-256-0208. And we'll get you some gifts out and set up a little coaching session.
Yeah, I think everybody should make sure that they remember what we saw in the video at first. If you don't think you can do it, think about all the things that we've talked about today. It's really not that, it's not necessarily easy, but it's very straightforward to get from here to there and to get your school where it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for anybody who was impacted negatively by COVID, we also still have that free site up, martialartsstimulus.com. There's an incredible package of free material, just, worth thousands that we put out to try to rescue the industry. Some people just chose not to be rescuable, but that's available. On that note, Tim, thank you so much for your contribution. Stephen White, Lee Montgomery, Jesse Thornton, Carol, and everybody else that perhaps I haven't met yet or recently, and Lance Soares, thank you for joining us here live. And for anybody watching the replay, be sure and also give Bob a call, and we'll give you some thoughts on how to accelerate your progress. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.